There's a giant standing in the global economy. It casts a shadow over every market, every central bank decision, and every geopolitical calculation. That giant is China. For decades, we have operated on a terrifying assumption that China is a $18 trillion powerhouse, rapidly catching the United States. We have treated it as the world's unquestioned engine of growth. But what if that assumption is catastrophically wrong? What if the numbers we've been fed, the official state-mandated statistics, are a massive illusion? New research using unconventional, independently verifiable data suggests a reality so shocking it instantly reshapes global power dynamics. China's economy may be 60% smaller than we thought. This isn't just an academic debate. It's the difference between a global titan and an over-leveraged house of cards. A 60% correction in size doesn't just mean a slowdown. It means the world's second largest economy is structurally far weaker than anyone anticipated. The global financial system, deeply reliant on China's demand and growth, is built upon a phantom number. When that phantom number finally collapses, the shockwave will make the 2008 crisis look like a market correction. This is the story of the great financial deception. The numbers are clear, the silence is deafening. Welcome to Code of Collapse. The core of the deception starts with the official narrative, the myth of perpetual growth. For over 4 decades, China's official economic data has told a fairy tale, consistent near double-digit growth year after year. This narrative fueled global investment and convinced multinational corporations to bet their futures on the Chinese consumer. The official story is built on 2 core pillars: relentless investment in infrastructure and manufacturing, and a massive state-controlled statistical apparatus designed to meet politically mandated growth targets. But every analyst who has dealt with China knows the secret. Local officials have a massive incentive to lie. Their careers and their personal power are tied directly to reporting spectacular, impossible growth numbers. The core of the deception isn't malice, it's the material product system, MPS, a Soviet-era accounting structure that prioritizes industrial output and massive construction, inherently encouraging capital misallocation and designed to pump up the most visible, tangible components of GDP. To truly verify the size of an autocratic economy, you must conduct an independent audit using data that cannot be fudged. You must use independent, satellite-verifiable information. This is where the shocking nightlights audit comes in. Economic activity requires energy. As economies grow, the amount of light visible from space at night increases. Research comparing satellite nightlight data to reported GDP figures across various countries found a profound correlation, but this correlation breaks down drastically in autocratic regimes. Autocratic countries consistently report 30% to 50% higher GDP growth than their nightlight expansion supports. The China shock occurred when analysts applied this nightlight audit methodology to China. The deviation between the officially reported economic size and the growth in independent proxies like electricity consumption, freight rail traffic, and nightlights was extreme. The conclusion was terrifying. China would have had to overstate its economy by a huge margin, placing its real size closer to 40% of the reported figure, meaning a 60% overstatement of its true economic weight. Critics often point to China's massive export figures, asking how an economy that dominates global manufacturing can be so small. The answer lies in the export paradox and the true role of value added. China operates largely as the final assembly point. It imports high-value components, microchips, specialized machinery from global partners, assembles them, and exports the final product. A significant portion of the value of that final product is foreign, yet the gross export value is credited to China. The true measure of China's internal economic strength is its domestic value added. When you subtract the huge imported component costs, the economic contribution generated within China is far smaller than the raw export figures suggest. China's ability to generate high domestic sustainable profits is increasingly limited by its reliance on foreign technology. If the GDP number is a deception, the real engine of the Chinese economy is built on 3 pillars of sand, and they are all failing now. The first pillar is the catastrophic property bubble, $60 trillion of debt. The core of China's economy has not been consumption, but property and infrastructure investment, accounting for nearly 30% of China's GDP, an unprecedented level. This was effectively fake GDP, economic activity created solely to meet a political target, leading to the infamous ghost cities. The collapse of giants like Evergrande was the inevitable bankruptcy of this entire growth model. The total debt tied to this sector, including local government financing vehicles, LGFVs, and shadow banking, is estimated to exceed $60 trillion. Local governments used LGFVs to bypass borrowing limits, funding endless non-performing infrastructure projects. This systemic local default is the reason the national economy is grinding to a halt. The primary engine of fake growth has seized up. The second pillar is the demographics death trap. This is a problem no central bank can fix. Thanks to the one-child policy, China's working-age population is shrinking rapidly. This means fewer workers supporting more retirees. Furthermore, China's GDP has a very low share of household consumption, around 39%. As the population ages, the incentive to save for old age increases, further suppressing domestic consumption and making the necessary transition to a consumer-driven economy almost impossible. Adding to the crisis is the record-high youth unemployment spike, over 20%. This is a structural mismatch between the education system and the shrinking manufacturing sector, creating a long-term consumption killer. The third pillar is capital flight and the trust deficit. This is the growing fear among China's wealthiest citizens and foreign investors that their assets are not safe from state control. The state arias unpredictable crackdowns on successful private sectors, Alibaba, Tencent, education, have destroyed investor confidence and led to a major acceleration in capital flight. China's wealthy are desperately seeking ways to move their money out of the country and into safer jurisdictions. Simultaneously, foreign direct investment, FDI, into China has collapsed to multi-decade lows. Global corporations are realizing the political risks outweigh the benefits. This de-risking trend is not temporary. It is a structural withdrawal of Western capital, guaranteeing a slow erosion of China's technological and manufacturing edge. The discovery that China is 60% smaller than assumed is not just China's problem, it is the world's problem. The global financial shock will occur through two main channels, creating massive shockwaves. The first shockwave is the inevitable global demand collapse. If China's economy is $8 trillion instead of $18 trillion, its global appetite for resources, luxury goods, and industrial components is drastically smaller. China is the world's biggest consumer of nearly every industrial commodity. A 60% real shrinkage means global demand for these materials will fall off a cliff, triggering commodity carnage. Resource-heavy emerging markets, Australia, Brazil, will face a brutal collapse in revenue. Furthermore, European export freezes are coming. Germany and the EU have built decades of prosperity on exporting high-value goods, machinery, luxury cars to the Chinese market. European industrial profits will evaporate, triggering a widespread recession across the continent. This will also kill the luxury recession as the property bubble collapses and private wealth vanishes globally. The second shockwave is the financial contagion and de-risking. The global financial system is deeply exposed to China's debt. As Chinese corporate defaults surge, especially in property and shadow banking, the losses will be transferred back to global balance sheets. The sheer volume of trade finance and supply chain financing links makes the system acutely vulnerable. To manage a crisis-ridden economy, China's central bank, the PBOC, may be forced to execute a massive, sudden devaluation of the yuan, RMB. This desperate move to make exports cheaper would send shockwaves through all global currencies, trigger a massive capital outflow, and potentially force other nations into a dangerous currency war. Finally, the realization of the true economic size will accelerate the decoupling, de-risking trend. Corporations will finally accept the Chinese market is too risky. The movement of supply chains to Vietnam, Mexico, and India will become a flood, not a trickle, guaranteeing a multi-year restructuring of global trade. The true size of China's economy is the new central variable in all global finance. It generates colossal opportunities for the prepared investor. When this crisis hits, the media will inevitably call it a black swan and claim it was unpredictable. They will ignore the decade of satellite data, the demographic warnings, and the structural incentives to lie. Your psychological test is to reject the media narrative. The crisis is not a surprise, it is the delayed consequence of a systemic deception. The magnitude of the crisis, which is now 60% worse than previously estimated, is the real shock. This 60% correction fundamentally changes the geopolitical calculation. If China's real GDP is closer to $8 trillion, the new power dynamic means US economic dominance is instantly cemented for the next 2 decades. The focus of the West must shift from managing China's rise to managing its chaotic collapse. This collapse, while painful, is the moment for capitalizing on the collapse, the true winter strategy. First, ensure maximum liquidity, maintain high cash reserves up to 24 months of expenses, and hold dedicated opportunity capital in liquid treasuries. You need the dry powder to buy assets at fire sale prices when the panic hits. Next is the short trade. The bubble was built on debt and real estate, so the best short trades involve sectors most exposed to the collapsed Chinese demand: luxury goods, industrial commodities, and specific emerging market debt. Finally, make the long-term winning bet on the safe harbor reshoring bet. Invest in companies positioned to benefit from the supply chain move out of China, logistics in Mexico, Vietnam, and US-based manufacturing tech. Simultaneously maintain a significant position in crisis assets like physical gold and silver. These assets are immune to the failure of the Chinese banking system or the collapse of the yuan. We have operated for too long under an illusion of Chinese strength. The Night Lights audit reveals the truth. The engine is 60% smaller than we thought. The time for denial is over. The coming crisis will be the market's reckoning. The choice is stark. Ignore the data and be crushed by the collapse, or prepare now and capitalize on the inevitable system reset. Don't be a victim of the state-mandated lie. Subscribe to Code of Collapse right now to receive our full report detailing the specific global markets and sectors that will collapse first and exactly where to deploy your capital during the chaos to secure your future. Click the bell. Your wealth depends on the truth.